The horrifying life of a servant in the Emperor's palace begins and ends with blood. My name is Laren Tovik. For 7 years I have cleaned golden halls by day and assisted with rituals by night. I have held the bowls that catch the blood of sacrifices. I have disposed of what remains afterward. The incense burns constantly, heavy clouds hanging like a funeral shroud through every corridor. They say it pleases him. They say it masks other smells. Both are true. But then the whispers started, faint voices that seem to come from the golden throne itself. Whispers that speak of hunger, of need, of the terrible truth behind what keeps the Astronomicon burning. What happens when a servant discovers what truly powers the light that guides humanity through the stars? My name is Laren Tovik. I am nothing. A speck of human dust clinging to the grandest monument mankind has ever constructed. I am a cleaner, a washer of floors, a polisher of railings, a disposer of things that must never be spoken of. I am an attendant in the holiest place in the galaxy, and I am drowning in blood that no one else seems to see. The incense burns day and night here, heavy clouds of it hanging like a funeral shroud through every vaulted chamber and gilded corridor. They say it pleases him. They say it masks other smells that might offend the pilgrims who are occasionally permitted into the outer sanctums. Both statements are true, though the latter more than the former. I have cleaned the censers. I know what they mix with the incense. Cremation ash from the faithful. It gives the smoke a certain weight, a certain texture that common incense lacks. The smell burrows into your skin and never leaves. When I close my eyes at night in my small cell, I can still see the golden light reflecting off marble floors. I can still feel the weight of my mop in calloused hands, pushing crimson-tinged water toward drains that lead somewhere I dare not contemplate. Every day is the same. Clean, polish, dispose, prepare, assist, observe, forget. The last task is the most important and the most difficult. The Adeptus Custodes stride through these halls like golden gods, their armor gleaming with a light that seems to come from within. 3 meters tall, inhuman in their perfection, they rarely acknowledge our existence. We are tools to them, no more worthy of recognition than a scrubbing brush or a candle. When they do speak to us, it is with the dispassionate tone one might use with a servitor. Clear, direct instructions that must be followed without question or hesitation. I have held the bowls that catch the blood of sacrifices. I have laid out the ceremonial blades on silk cloths. I have helped strap down those who might struggle against their fate. I have disposed of what remains afterward, all without question, all without hesitation, all for him, for Terra, for humanity. So I was taught, so I believed. But then the whispers started. It began subtly, a sound like distant voices carrying through ventilation shafts. Words just beyond comprehension, spoken in a language that hurt my ears. I attributed it to exhaustion, to the strange acoustics of the massive chambers, to anything rational. Then I noticed other attendants pressing their hands over their ears when no discernible sound was present. I saw the way some would stare at blank walls as if reading invisible text. I watched as, one by one, they disappeared. Reassigned, our overseer would say, transferred to other duties. But their personal items remained uncollected. Their sleeping cells were simply reassigned to new attendants, fresh-faced men and women with the same look of awe-struck devotion I once possessed. I stopped asking questions. Questions draw attention, and attention is dangerous in the shadow of the golden throne. Yet the whispers grew louder, most insistent during the sacrificial rites, when the Astronomicon's light would flicker imperceptibly to most but unmistakably to those of us who spent our lives in its glow. The correlation was impossible to ignore. Blood flowed, and the whispers intensified. Blood stopped, and they receded like an outgoing tide, leaving behind fragments of thoughts not my own. I have served in the Sanctum Imperialis for 7 years now. 7 years of cleaning golden halls by day and assisting with rituals by night. 7 years of watching colleagues disappear. 7 years of whispers growing steadily louder. I know things now that I should not know. I have seen things I cannot unsee. And tonight, I will share my tale, though it damns me to do so. For I believe I have discovered the terrible truth of what truly keeps the Astronomicon burning. What our glorious God Emperor consumes to maintain his vigil over humanity. And I must decide whether to remain silent and complicit, or to join the next procession of the damned. The choice, I fear, has already been made for me. For those who hear the whispers never remain in the Sanctum Imperialis for long. One way or another, we all become fuel for his light. Let me tell you of the golden halls, of the blood-soaked altars, of the things that happen in candlelit chambers, while the rest of humanity sleeps in ignorant bliss. Let me tell you of my duties, and how they have slowly eroded my sanity until I can no longer distinguish between reality and nightmare. Let me tell you of the whispers from the Golden Throne. It is said that every space hulk carries the echoes of those who died aboard it. That the metal and stone absorb the final moments of the dying, their screams and pleas trapped within the material itself. I believe the same is true of the Imperial Palace. These walls have witnessed 10,000 years of sacrifice. They have absorbed the death cries of millions, the final desperate prayers of the chosen faithful sent to nourish our Emperor. I remember a young woman, no more than 20 standard Terran years. Her eyes were the pale blue of a winter sky, her hands steady as the custodian explained her purpose. She had been selected from billions, chosen from among the most devout pilgrims to Terra. To give herself to the Emperor was the greatest honor imaginable. She wept with joy as they secured her to the altar. I held a golden bowl beneath her throat as the ritual blade descended. She did not scream. Many do not. The faith sustains them until the very end. It is afterward, when their souls are drawn into the workings of the Golden Throne, that the screaming begins. Not in our reality, but somewhere adjacent to it. A place only those who have spent too long in these halls can perceive. The incense that day was particularly thick, sandalwood and myrrh, mixed with the ashes of 100 faithful. It clung to my robes, to my skin, to the inside of my lungs. As her blood filled the bowl I held, its warmth seeping through the gold into my hands, I heard it for the first time. A voice that was not a voice. Words that were not words. More, it said, though saying is too simple a concept. It was hunger given form, need given language. Always more. I nearly dropped the bowl. The custodian noticed my hesitation, his impassive golden faceplate turning toward me with mechanical precision. I steadied myself. To falter in my duties was unthinkable. I continued holding the bowl until it was full, then carried it reverently to the channel that would direct its contents to the mechanisms of the Golden Throne itself. As I poured the blood into the channel, watching it flow down toward unseen receptacles, the whisper came again. Never enough, more. My hands trembled. Blood splashed onto my robes, a cardinal sin for one in my position. The stain would mark me as careless, unworthy. I would be reprimanded, perhaps reassigned to less important duties, but in that moment, all I could focus on was the voice that emanated from the channel, from the blood itself, from everywhere and nowhere. That night, I scrubbed my robes until my knuckles bled, trying to remove all evidence of my failure. As I worked, I noticed other attendants doing the same. Some were crying silently. Others wore expressions of such vacancy that they might as well have been servitors. None spoke. We had all learned that silence was survival. In my tiny cell, lying on a cot barely wide enough for my frame, I pressed my palms against my ears and prayed for silence. The Emperor protects, I told myself. The Emperor protects. But as sleep finally took me, one question burned through my mind. Who protects us from the Emperor? The rituals follow a precise schedule, dictated by calculations so complex that only the highest members of the Adeptus Mathematica can comprehend them. Some days there are no sacrifices at all. Others require dozens, processed with mechanical efficiency. The Astronomicon must be maintained. The psychic beacon that allows travel through the immaterium must never falter. Without it, humanity would be isolated, vulnerable, doomed. We are told this from our first day. The importance of our duties is impressed upon us with religious fervor. We are not simply cleaning floors and preparing ritual implements. We are maintaining the heart of the Imperium itself. Every polished surface reflects his divine light. Every properly executed ritual strengthens his grip on humanity's survival. I believed this. We all did. Faith sustains us in these lightless halls where the sun never shines. Faith gives purpose to the endless cleaning of blood from marble floors. Faith transforms the disposal of human remains from gruesome labor into sacred duty. But faith erodes under the constant drip of whispers from beyond. There was a chamber, deep within the inner sanctum, that few attendants were permitted to enter. Selection for duty there was supposedly random, but those chosen never smiled, never met the eyes of others afterward. I feared that chamber more than anything, though I knew not why. Then came the day when Overseer Vanth called. "My name, Attendant Tovik. You will assist in Chamber 17 tonight." The words fell like a death sentence. Around me, other attendants lowered their eyes, some making the sign of the Aquila surreptitiously. None offered congratulations. None spoke at all. I bowed my head in acknowledgement, my throat too dry for words. That day passed in a blur of routine tasks performed with mechanical precision while my mind raced. What waited in Chamber 17? Why did those assigned there return changed? Would I return at all? I considered fleeing, but where would I go? The Imperial Palace was a world unto itself, a labyrinth of corridors and chambers stretching for kilometers in all directions. And beyond it lay Terra, a planet I knew only from picked recordings and data slates. I was a servant of the Golden Throne. I existed only to serve. There was nowhere else for me. As the artificial lighting dimmed to simulate night, I reported to the antechamber outside room 17 as instructed. 2 custodians stood guard, their golden armor reflecting the light of flickering candles. Between them, a heavy door of adamantium and oak, carved with scenes of the Emperor's conquest of Terra millennia ago. "Attendant Tovik reporting as ordered," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. One custodian inclined his head fractionally. "You will observe complete silence once inside. You will follow all instructions without hesitation. You will forget what you see when you leave." I swallowed hard. "Yes, my lord." "You will prepare the implements as directed by the Master of Sacrifice. You will dispose of remains as directed. You will not approach the central dais under any circumstances." "Yes, my lord." The custodian studied me for a long moment, his face hidden behind his ornate helmet. "The Emperor's light shines brightest in the darkness, attendant. Remember that." With that cryptic statement, he stepped aside, and the massive door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. The smell hit me first. Not the familiar scent of incense and blood, but something older, muskier, the smell of ancient paper and older magic, of power contained but straining against its bonds. I entered Chamber 17, and understood at last why those who served there never spoke of it. Why they returned with empty eyes and trembling hands. Why some did not return at all. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with bookshelves that reached the distant ceiling. But these were no ordinary books. They squirmed on the shelves, bound in materials I could not identify, their spines marked with characters that hurt my eyes to look upon. In the center of the room stood a dais, and upon that dais, I cannot describe what I saw there, not fully. My mind shies away from the memory even now. It was like a tear in reality, a wound in the fabric of our dimension. Around it moved robed figures, their garments marked with symbols similar to those of the Inquisition but subtly wrong, as if viewed through a warped lens. One approached me, face hidden within a deep hood. "The implements," the figure said, voice neither male nor female, but something between or perhaps beyond. A gloved hand gestured to a table I hadn't noticed before, upon which rested tools both familiar and alien, knives of standard design alongside curved blades that seemed to bend in impossible directions. bowls of gold beside containers of living glass that pulsed with their own heartbeat. I moved to the table and began arranging the items as I had been trained, though many were unfamiliar. My hands worked while my eyes kept straying to the dais, to the wrongness at its center. And from that wrongness, I heard the whispers more clearly than ever before. 17, they said. 17 is where we wait. 17 is where we reach through. 17 is where the veil thins. I dropped a knife. The clatter of metal against stone echoed obscenely loud in the chamber's unnatural acoustics. All movement ceased. All hooded heads turned toward me. I hastily retrieved the knife, muttering apologies despite the instruction for silence. The nearest robed figure leaned close. "He hears them," it said to another. "This one hears already." "Then he is ready," came the reply. "Mark him for the special procession." Ice flooded my veins. I had heard rumors of the special procession whispered among attendants late at night. Those marked for it were never seen again, not reassigned, not transferred, simply gone, as if they had never existed. I continued arranging implements, my hands now shaking visibly. The figures returned to their work at the dais, manipulating the tear in ways I could not comprehend. And all the while the whispers grew more insistent. "Join us," they said. "Feed us. Become us." Hours passed in that nightmare chamber. I performed my duties as required, passing tools when requested, removing substances I refused to identify, cleaning spills that moved of their own accord. When finally dismissed, I fled rather than walked back to my quarters, ignoring the curious glances of other attendants. In my cell, I scrubbed my hands until they were raw, but could not remove the sensation of wrongness that clung to them. Sleep eluded me entirely. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the whispers now a constant companion. "They have marked you," the whispers told me. "The special procession awaits." I knew then that I had limited time remaining. Whatever fate awaited those in the special procession would soon be mine. Unless I found another path. Unless I discovered the truth of what connected Chamber 17 to the Golden Throne, to the Astronomicon, and what role the sacrifices truly played. Morning came, and with it, the routine that had defined my existence for 7 years. Clean. Polish. Dispose. Prepare. But now I cleaned with purpose, moving systematically through areas that would grant me access to information normally denied to one of my station. I polished reflective surfaces that allowed me to observe secure data slates from angles their users did not anticipate. I disposed of documents along with the usual refuse, carefully separating those that might hold clues. I prepared myself for the possibility that this very day might be my last. What I learned chilled me to my core. The sacrifices were not merely symbolic. They did not simply provide psychic energy to sustain the Emperor in some abstract theological sense. They were being processed, refined, their very souls distilled into something the Golden Throne could consume directly. And Chamber 17 was where the most promising candidates were evaluated for a far more significant contribution. The special procession was not a journey to another assignment. It was a journey into the Golden Throne itself. Those chosen would become permanently integrated into its mechanisms, their souls providing continuous sustenance rather than the momentary nourishment of a standard sacrifice. And I had been marked for this honor. That night, as I assisted with the regular rituals, I paid special attention to the movements of the custodians, to the layout of passages I had previously ignored, to potential routes of escape, if escape was even possible. If there was anywhere in the galaxy one could hide from the eyes of the Emperor. The sacrifice that night was an elderly man, his body frail but his faith unwavering. As his blood flowed into the ceremonial basin, his eyes met mine. They widened slightly, as if seeing something unexpected. "You hear them too," he whispered, so faintly that only I caught the words. Before I could respond, his eyes glazed over as his life departed. But that momentary connection confirmed what I had begun to suspect. I was not alone in hearing the whispers. Perhaps all who spent enough time in these halls eventually heard them. Perhaps that was why attendants were regularly reassigned before they could share what they experienced. As I cleaned the altar, afterward, a custodian approached. They rarely addressed us directly unless giving orders, so his words struck me with particular force. "Attendant Tovik, you will report to Preparation Chamber 3 tomorrow at first bell. Bring nothing with you." The special procession was moving faster than I had anticipated. I had perhaps 12 hours to act or to accept my fate. I bowed deeply, hiding the panic in my eyes. "Yes, my lord, it will be as you command." That night in my cell, the whispers were almost deafening. They spoke of power beyond imagining, of joining with divinity, of transcending mortal limitations. They promised an end to fear, to uncertainty, to individual consciousness. They offered eternity as part of something greater. They lied, I was certain. Whatever awaited in the special procession was not ascension but consumption, not honor but obliteration. I had seen too much, heard too much, to believe otherwise. I made my decision as the whispers reached a crescendo, as impossible hands seemed to caress my face in the darkness of my cell. I would not report to Preparation Chamber 3. I would not meekly accept the fate assigned to me. I would seek answers in the only place I knew might hold them, Chamber 17 itself. If I was to be damned, I would know exactly what I was being damned for. The hours before first bell were spent in preparation of a different kind. I gathered small items that might serve as tools: a thin metal rod used for clearing incense burners, a vial of blessed oil that could perhaps serve as a flammable distraction if needed, a length of cord from my cleaning supplies. Pitiful implements, but they were all I had. The movement of attendants and adepts through the imperial palace followed patterns as regular as clockwork. I had observed these patterns for years, noting when particular corridors were empty, when guards rotated positions, when security was focused elsewhere. There was a brief window between the changing of the custodian guard and the arrival of the morning cleaning detail when Chamber 17 would be minimally monitored. I moved through service passageways, timing my progress carefully. Twice I had to hide in alcoves as unexpected patrols passed. My heart thundered so loudly in my chest I feared they would hear it, but they moved on, oblivious to my presence. Perhaps the whispers were helping me, guiding me toward what they wanted me to see. The thought was not comforting. The antechamber to room 17 was empty when I arrived, the massive door closed but not sealed. This struck me as strange, as it violated all security protocols I knew of. Either I had stumbled upon extraordinary carelessness, or I was walking into a trap. The whispers urged me forward regardless. See, know, understand, join. With trembling hands I pushed against the heavy door. It swung open with surprising ease, revealing Chamber 17 in a state I had not seen before. The circular room was dimly lit by a single source of illumination. The Terra at its center. The wrongness I had observed previously had expanded, now a pulsing wound in reality approximately 2 meters in diameter. It cast a light that was not light, illuminating the chamber in hues that had no place in the natural spectrum. The bookshelves with their squirming tomes were still there, but the implements I had arranged were gone. The robed figures were absent. I was alone with the Terra and the whispers that emanated from it with painful clarity. At last, face to face, vessel to source. I approached cautiously, drawn by a compulsion I could not resist yet still feared. As I neared the dais, I began to understand what I was seeing. The Terra was a controlled gateway, a carefully maintained connection between realms. On one side, the material reality I inhabited. On the other, was the Astronomicon itself. Not as the faithful imagined it, a lighthouse of pure psychic energy projecting the Emperor's will across the galaxy, but as it truly was, a churning, hungry vortex of souls, of consciousness rendered down to its component energy, of human minds stripped of identity and repurposed as fuel. And at its center, directing this horrific machinery with implacable purpose, was him. Not as the perfect, golden god depicted in imperial propaganda, not as the benevolent father of humanity, but as he truly was, after 10 millennia of sustained agony, a being of pure will, held together by determination and fed by sacrifice, his original purpose long ago subsumed by the simple imperative to continue existing at any cost. "You see now," the whispers said, and I realized they were not coming from the Terra itself, but from him. The Emperor of Mankind was speaking directly into my mind, his thoughts fragmented by distance and the strain of maintaining the Astronomicon. I fell to my knees before the dais, not in worship but in horror. The truth was unbearable. The Imperium of Man, with its trillions of souls spread across the galaxy, its endless wars and fanatical devotion, existed for one purpose only: to sustain this abomination that had once been humanity's greatest champion. We were cattle, nothing more. Our lives, our deaths, our souls themselves, mere fuel for a machine that had long ago forgotten its original purpose. Not forgotten, the whispers corrected, reading my thoughts as easily as if they were written before me. Evolved, adapted, become more. Images flooded my mind. The Emperor as he once was, striding across battlefields, uniting Terra under his rule. The betrayal of Horus, the catastrophic civil war that followed, the terrible wounds inflicted upon the Emperor, wounds that should have been fatal. The creation of the Golden Throne as a life support mechanism. The slow, inevitable corruption of its purpose as the Emperor's consciousness fractured under the strain of millennia. I was to guide. The whispers acknowledged. Now I consume. No choice, no alternative. Humanity needs the beacon. The beacon needs souls. Equation simple. I saw the mathematics of atrocity laid bare before me. The careful calculations determining exactly how many sacrifices were required to maintain the Astronomicon at its necessary luminosity. The selection processes identifying which humans provided the most efficient fuel. The breeding programs ensuring a steady supply of the most potent psychic individuals. An entire bureaucracy of murder, operating with cold precision for 10,000 years. Special procession, the whispers continued. Greatest honor, constant contribution, eternal service. Now I understood fully what awaited me in Preparation Chamber 3. Not simply death, but incorporation. My consciousness would be preserved, kept alive artificially while my soul was continuously siphoned into the mechanisms of the Golden Throne. I would become a living battery, aware but unable to act, screaming but unable to make a sound, and this would continue not for years or decades but potentially for centuries. Join us, urged the whispers. Necessity, duty, glory. I backed away from the dais, from the Terra, from the terrible truth it revealed. My back struck something solid, not the wall, which should have been meters behind me. Something much closer. Armored hands gripped my shoulders with irresistible strength. I did not need to turn to know what held me. The distinctive scent of sacred oils and ancient ceramite told me all I needed to know. A custodian had been waiting, silent and unmoving in the shadows of Chamber 17, waiting for me. "Attendant Tovik," said a voice I recognized as belonging to the custodian who had summoned me to the special procession. "Your curiosity does you credit. Few have the courage to seek truth directly." I did not struggle against his grip. It would have been futile. "Is it all true?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Everything I saw in there? Everything I heard?" "Truth is subjective," the custodian replied. "What matters is necessity. The Astronomicon must remain lit. Without it, humanity falls. All we have built, all we have preserved through millennia of struggle, would be lost in a single generation. Would you sacrifice trillions to save thousands?" Put in such terms, the moral calculus seemed clear, yet the horror of what I had witnessed remained. "There must be another way," I said. The custodian's grip tightened fractionally. "If there were, do you not think we would have found it in 10,000 years of searching? The finest minds of each generation have sought alternatives. None have succeeded." He turned me to face him, his helmet removed so I could see his face. It was handsome in a cold, perfect way, like a statue carved by a master artisan. His eyes held neither cruelty nor compassion, simply absolute conviction. "You have been chosen for the special procession, Attendant Tovik, not randomly. Not as punishment for your unauthorized explorations. You were selected weeks ago, when you first began hearing the whispers clearly. It is a sign of compatibility. Your soul resonates at a frequency particularly suited to the needs of the Golden Throne." "I don't want this honor," I said, knowing the futility of my protest. "What you want is irrelevant," he said, not unkindly. "What humanity needs is all that matters. But know this, those in the special procession do not suffer as you might imagine. They experience a form of transcendence. Their consciousness merges with aspects of the Emperor himself. They know truths no mortal mind was meant to comprehend. It is not a fate to be feared, but embraced." I thought of the whispers, of their hunger and need, of the fractured, consuming thing that once was the Emperor. Embracing such a fate seemed impossible. "Come," the custodian said. "It is time." He guided me from Chamber 17 with firm pressure, back through the empty antechamber and into the corridor beyond. There, 2 more custodians waited, alongside a floating platform draped in white cloth. A conveyance for those unable or unwilling to walk to their fate. I considered running, I considered fighting, I did neither. What purpose would resistance serve? Where in the vastness of the Imperial Palace could I hide? What could one insignificant attendant do against the might of the Adeptus Custodes? Against the will of the Emperor himself? Yet as I looked at the draped platform, as I contemplated the eternity of living death that awaited me, something hardened within my soul. A resolve I had not known I possessed. If I could not escape this fate, perhaps I could subvert it. If I could not save myself, perhaps I could still act in some small way against the monstrous system I had uncovered. The whispers surged in response to my thoughts, suddenly anxious, warning. Danger. Compliance necessary. Resistance futile. For the first time, I pushed back against them, forming my own thoughts into a weapon. "I know what you are now," I thought at the whispers. "I know what you fear." The custodian noticed my hesitation. "Attendant Tovik? Is there a problem?" I met his eyes, seeing now that behind his conviction lay something else. Uncertainty. Fear, carefully controlled but present nonetheless. They were not as confident in the necessity of their actions as they pretended. They doubted. "I have a request," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "Before I join the special procession, I wish to speak with one who has already undergone the transformation. To prepare myself properly." The custodians exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, my captor nodded. "A reasonable request. It can be arranged." I had not expected compliance. I had expected to be ignored, to be forced onto the platform and taken to Preparation Chamber 3 without further delay. This concession, small as it was, gave me hope. Perhaps there were cracks in the system. Perhaps not all custodians were equally committed to the terrible necessity they enforced. "Thank you," I said, bowing my head to hide the calculation in my eyes. They escorted me not to Preparation Chamber 3, but to another area entirely, one I had never visited before. The architecture here was older, the technology more archaic. We passed through security checkpoints where servo skulls scanned us with red beam eyes and automated gun turrets tracked our movement. Eventually, we reached a circular chamber much smaller than 17, but similar in its basic layout. At its center stood not a dais but a cylindrical tank filled with cloudy fluid. Within that fluid floated a human form, or what had once been human. The body was emaciated, the skin translucent enough to reveal the network of tubes and wires that penetrated it at various points. The head had been largely replaced with machinery, only the lower portion of the face remaining recognizably human. "This is Adept Soren," my custodian escort informed me. "He joined the special procession 273 years ago. He remains conscious and can communicate, though the process requires effort on his part. You may ask your questions." I approached the tank cautiously, revulsion and pity warring within me. The thing that had been Adept Soren hung suspended in its nutrient bath, giving no indication it was aware of my presence. Yet as I neared, its single remaining eye opened, fixing me with a gaze of surprising clarity. Machinery hummed. A Vox speaker mounted on the side of the tank crackled to life. "You, hear, them." The voice was mechanical, but underlying it was something unmistakably human. Pain, endless, unfathomable pain. "Yes," I admitted. "I hear the whispers." Then, "You know. I know what awaits me in the special procession. I know what you have become." The eye blinked slowly. The Vox speaker emitted a sound that might have been a laugh in a being still possessed of lungs. "No. You know. Nothing. Yet. Tell me," I urged, stepping closer to the tank. "Tell me what it's truly like." The custodians shifted uneasily but did not intervene. Perhaps they too wished to hear what Adept Soren would say. Perhaps, in all their centuries of service, they had never thought to ask. First, pain. Soren's voice rasped through the speaker. Pain. Beyond. Imagining. Then, dissolution. Identity. Fading. Becoming. Part. Of. Him. Is it, as the custodians claim, a form of transcendence, a union with the Emperor's consciousness? That terrible mechanical laugh again, union. Yes, but not. As described, we become fuel, nothing more. One of the custodians stepped forward. Enough. Adept Soren's cognitive functions are clearly degraded. His perception is unreliable. Let him speak, I insisted, surprising myself with my boldness. If I am to join him, I deserve the truth. The custodian hesitated, then stepped back. Very well, but be quick. I turned back to the tank. Adept Soren, is there any way to resist? Once the process begins, can it be stopped? The eye widened slightly. Stopped? No. Subverted? Perhaps. The whispers. Work. Both. Ways. Before I could ask what he meant, alarms began to sound. Red emergency lighting bathed the chamber. The custodians instantly shifted to alert stance, weapons appearing in their hands as if by magic. Security breach in Sector 7, announced a metallic voice over the facility's Vox system. Unknown incursion. All personnel to battle stations. This area is secure, my escort said to his companions. Complete the special procession transfer. I will investigate the breach. As he turned to leave, Soren's Vox speaker crackled again. Now, he said, his voice suddenly stronger, more coherent. While they are distracted. And then several things happened at once. The fluid in Soren's tank began to glow with an unnatural light. The whispers in my mind rose to a deafening roar. The two remaining custodians raised their weapons, not toward the door but towards Soren's tank. And I felt something surge through me, a power I had never known I possessed, awakening in response to Soren's call. The whispers work both ways. I understood now. Those connected to the Golden Throne could receive communication from the Emperor's fragmented consciousness, but they could also, potentially, send thoughts back. Influence rather than merely be influenced. And if enough of them acted in concert, Soren had been planning this for centuries, subtly reaching out to other members of the special procession, forming a network of minds within the very system designed to consume them. Waiting for someone like me, someone newly awakened to the truth, someone not yet incorporated into the Golden Throne but able to hear its whispers. The custodians fired their weapons. The tank shattered. Fluid and blood sprayed across the chamber. I should have been horrified, but instead I felt a surge of something like triumph. Not my emotion, but Soren's, transmitted directly into my mind in his final moments of independent existence, and with that transmission came knowledge. the location of others who heard the whispers but remained free. A network of resistance operating within the very heart of the Sanctum Imperialis. Individuals like me who had glimpsed the truth and chosen to act rather than submit. The custodians moved with transhuman speed, one securing me while the other examined the shattered remains of Adept Soren's life support system. I offered no resistance. There was no need. What Soren had given me could not be taken away by physical restraint. This was planned, the custodian holding me said, his voice tight with controlled anger. A coordinated effort. The breach in Sector 7 was a diversion. Impossible, his companion replied. The Special Procession members are isolated from one another specifically to prevent such coordination. And yet it has occurred. The grip on my arm tightened painfully. This one knows something. I can see it in his eyes. They were right. I knew things now that I should not know. I knew of 17 others like me, scattered throughout the Imperial Palace, attendants, adepts, even a few low-ranking tech priests. All hearing the whispers, all marked for the special procession, all now aware of each other's existence thanks to Soren's final act. I knew of ways through the palace unseen by surveillance systems, of blind spots in the custodians' patrol patterns, of secured channels through which messages could be passed undetected. Soren had spent centuries accumulating this knowledge, patiently gathering intelligence through the very network of whispers meant to control him. Take him directly to Preparation Chamber 3, the custodian examining Soren's remains ordered. Maximum security protocols. Alert the Captain General that we may have a coordinated insurgency. I was half dragged, half carried from the chamber, my mind racing with possibilities. The special procession was not the end I had feared. It was an opportunity. If Soren could maintain his sense of self for centuries, could reach out to others despite his imprisonment, then the system was not infallible. The whispers could be resisted. The Golden Throne's hunger could be subverted. But I needed time. Time I would not have if they succeeded in integrating me into the special procession immediately. As we moved through corridors now filled with running figures responding to the security breach, I focused on the knowledge Soren had placed in my mind. There were fail-safes within the palace's security systems, emergency protocols that could be triggered under specific circumstances. One such protocol involved containment procedures for suspected warp contamination, procedures that would temporarily isolate sections of the palace, including Preparation Chamber 3. I had no psychic abilities that I knew of. The whispers had come to me unbidden, not summoned. Yet now, drawing on Soren's knowledge, I reached for something within myself, a capacity I had never acknowledged or explored. I focused on the nearest security scanner as we passed beneath it, projecting a single desperate thought. Warp contamination detected in Sector 3. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, alarms different from those already sounding began to wail. Containment shutters slammed down ahead of us, cutting off access to the passage leading to Preparation Chamber 3. Automated systems sprayed sanctified water and burning incense into the air. Vox speakers crackled with automated warnings about possible demonic incursion. The custodians halted, exchanging glances of confusion. This was not part of the coordinated response to the Sector 7 breach. This was a new emergency, one directly affecting their planned route. Impossible, one muttered. The sensors would have detected any genuine warp activity. Unless the sensors themselves have been compromised, his companion responded. We cannot risk exposure. Protocol dictates we secure the asset in the nearest sanctified chamber until containment is confirmed. The asset, me, no longer even an attendant or a person, but a resource to be managed. A component to be installed. Their casual dehumanization strengthened my resolve. They changed direction, leading me toward what I recognized as a smaller ritual chamber used for the preparation of minor sacrifices. It would be empty at this hour, with all available personnel responding to the multiple security alerts now echoing through the palace. As we entered the chamber, one custodian secured the door, while the other forced me to my knees in the center of a purification circle inscribed on the floor. Neither spoke. They moved with the absolute certainty of those who have performed the same actions countless times over centuries of service. The circle was designed to in 2020 contain psychic energy to prevent any uncontrolled emissions during ritual preparation. Now, ironically, it might serve as my only chance. Soren's knowledge suggested that such circles could, if used properly, also block the whispers temporarily. Create a space of mental silence in which I could think clearly, without his fractured consciousness pressing against my own. As expected, the moment I was fully within the circle, the whispers faded. Not completely, but enough that I could concentrate on what I needed to do next. The custodian who had secured the door approached, removing something from a compartment in his armor. A syringe filled with golden fluid that caught the light like liquid metal. "This will begin the preparation process," he informed me tonelessly. "It will paralyze your voluntary muscle functions while leaving your consciousness intact. Do not resist. Acceptance will make the transition easier." I looked up at him, at his perfect impassive face, and asked the question that had been forming in my mind since I had learned the truth. "Do you truly believe this is necessary, that there is no alternative?" His hand paused, the syringe hovering. For a brief moment, something like doubt flickered across his features. "I believe in the Emperor's will," he said finally. "The Emperor's will?" I laughed, a harsh sound even to my own ears. "I have heard his whispers, felt his hunger. What remains of the Emperor does not will anything but consumption. His consciousness is fractured, broken by 10 millennia of agony. What you serve is not the Emperor of mankind, but a machine that wears his name, fed by the souls of those who worship him." The custodian's expression hardened. "Heresy. The words of one already corrupted." "Not corrupted," I corrected. "Awakened. As you could be. You hear the whispers too, don't you? All who spend enough time near the Golden Throne eventually do. You've simply learned to ignore them, to push them aside as necessary sacrifice, for duty." His companion shifted uneasily. "Enough talk. Complete the injection." But the first custodian hesitated, the syringe still poised above my arm. "What alternative do you propose, attendant? Without the Astronomicon, humanity is lost. Trillions would die as ships foundered in the warp, as planets were cut off from supply, as predators sensed our weakness and moved in for the kill." "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know this system is failing. The hunger grows stronger each year. More sacrifices are required. The special procession expands. Eventually, even that will not be enough." "And then what?" "Then we will find another solution," the custodian said firmly, "as we always have." "When?" I demanded. "After another 10,000 years of feeding him souls, after how many millions more are consumed. There must be a point at which the cost becomes too high, even for the survival of humanity." The second custodian stepped forward, his patience clearly exhausted. "This philosophical debate is pointless. The injection, brother. Now." As he reached for the syringe, intending to administer it himself, the chamber's Vox speaker crackled to life. "Attention all security personnel. Multiple breaches detected throughout the palace. Evidence of coordinated insurgency. All special procession candidates to be terminated immediately. Repeat, terminate, not preserve. Containment priority alpha." The custodians froze, looking at each other in obvious shock. "Terminate?" one whispered. "But the candidates are irreplaceable resources. The preparation process takes months to identify compatible replacements." "Unless the compatibility itself is the threat," the other replied slowly. "Unless something about those who hear the whispers most clearly poses a danger we have not recognized." I smiled despite my precarious position. "Soren," I murmured, "you magnificent bastard." Somehow, through the network of minds already incorporated into the Golden Throne, Soren had managed one final act of rebellion. He had triggered a protocol designed for the worst possible security scenario, corruption of the Golden Throne itself. The custodians were now faced with a terrible choice: follow the termination order, eliminating a valuable resource but ensuring security, or preserve me for the special procession against explicit orders, risking whatever threat had triggered such an extreme response. "We should consult the Captain General directly," one said. "These orders may be a fabrication, part of the insurgency." "The channel was authenticated," the other replied, "and we are sworn to obey." As they debated, I reached out with my mind, not to the whispers this time, but to the others like me that Soren had revealed. 17 minds scattered throughout the palace, all now aware of each other's existence, all now acting in concert for the first time. I felt them respond, felt their confusion give way to understanding, to purpose. We had been selected for the special procession because our minds resonated at a frequency particularly compatible with the Golden Throne. That same compatibility now allowed us to connect with each other, to share knowledge, to coordinate in ways the palace's security systems could not detect or prevent. One was in a communication hub, subtly altering messages between security teams. Another had access to environmental controls, manipulating lighting and air circulation to hinder pursuers. 2 more were in the lower levels, disabling backup power systems. All moving according to plans Soren had developed over centuries, plans now flowing into our collective consciousness. "He's doing something," one of the custodians said suddenly, noticing my distant expression. "Some kind of psychic communication." The syringe plunged toward my arm. I made no move to avoid it. There was no need. The circle in which I knelt, designed to contain psychic energy, now served another purpose. As the needle touched my skin, energy discharged from the circle's inscribed runes, a failsafe triggered by the attempted introduction of foreign material during an active containment procedure. The golden fluid never entered my veins. Instead, the syringe shattered, its contents spraying across the custodian's armor where it hissed and smoked like acid. He jerked back in surprise, momentarily distracted. It was enough. Through the network of connected minds, I accessed knowledge that should have been impossible for me to possess. The precise nerve points on a custodian's body that, when struck in perfect sequence, would temporarily disrupt the connection between their enhanced nervous system and their muscles. My hand moved with a speed and precision that was not entirely my own. 3 strikes, too fast to follow with the human eye. The custodian collapsed, not dead but paralyzed by his own body's emergency shutdown protocols. His companion reacted instantly, Guardian spear leveled at my heart. But he too had been affected by the circle's discharge, his armor's machine spirit momentarily confused by conflicting signals. The spear fired a fraction of a second too late, the energy blast scorching the floor where I had been kneeling rather than my flesh. I was already moving, my body guided by borrowed knowledge and skill. Not fighting the custodian directly, which would have been suicide, but evading, using the chamber's ritual furnishings as obstacles. He was hampered by his desire to take me alive, by uncertainty about what was happening. I had no such constraints. "Security breach in preparation chamber 7. I called out, my voice a perfect mimicry of the palace's automated alert system. More knowledge that was not my own, drawn from the collective experience of our impromptu network. The custodian hesitated, head turning fractionally toward the chamber entrance, instinct momentarily overriding training. It was all the opening I needed. My hand found the environmental control panel concealed beside a ritual basin, another piece of knowledge pulled from our shared consciousness. I entered a sequence, not fully understanding its purpose but trusting Soren's centuries of planning. Incense flooded the chamber, not the standard variety but a specialized blend used only during certain high-security rituals. Its scent was distinctive, triggering specific responses in the armor of custodies, responses designed to protect them from warp-based threats. The custodian's armor sealed completely, helmet locking into place, external sensors shutting down in favor of internal life support. For approximately 7 seconds, he would be effectively blind and deaf to the physical world around him, relying solely on his armor's machine spirit to interpret potential threats. 7 seconds. An eternity in combat terms. Enough time to flee through the small maintenance hatch that Soren's knowledge revealed behind a decorative panel. A passage barely large enough for my frame, but impossible for a custodian in full armor to follow. As I slipped into the narrow passage, I heard the custodian's armor system cycling back to normal operation. Heard his voice, distorted by his helmet's vox grill, calling for reinforcements. I did not wait to hear more. The passage led downward, through the rarely seen infrastructure of the palace. Ancient conduits carrying power, water, data. Maintenance tunnels designed for servitors rather than full-sized humans. I crawled, climbed, squeezed through spaces that grew increasingly confined, guided always by the collective knowledge of our network. 3 others had already reached our rendezvous point. A forgotten storage chamber deep within the palace's oldest sections. Sections dating back to before the Horus Heresy, before the Emperor's internment on the Golden Throne. Places whose very existence had been erased from official records but lingered in the fragmented memories of the Emperor himself, memories now accessible through the whispers. Tovik. 1. Greeted me as I emerged from a ventilation shaft. A woman, perhaps a few years older than myself, her Imperial Palace attendant's robes stained and torn. I am Meris. This is Donal and Ella's. She indicated 2 men, one barely more than a boy, the other old enough to be my grandfather. How many others will make it? I asked, accepting a water flask from Donal. Unknown, Meris replied grimly. The custodies are thorough, but Soren's distraction has them spread thin. We may have as many as 10 when all is done. And then what? I couldn't help asking. Where do we go from here? The palace is sealed. Terra itself would offer no sanctuary even if we could somehow reach the surface. We don't leave, Elas said, his voice carrying the distinctive accent of someone born on a distant world. That was never the plan. Soren worked for centuries to bring us to this point, to assemble the right minds in the right place at the right time. We are not meant to escape. We are meant to change things from within. Change what exactly? I demanded. The special procession? The sacrificial system? The Golden Throne itself? We're attendants and minor adepts, not tech priests or engineers. Meris smiled thinly. We are more than that now. Each of us was selected for the special procession because our minds resonate at a frequency compatible with the Golden Throne. That same compatibility allows us to connect with each other, and potentially to connect with him in ways the current system does not allow. You mean the Emperor? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. I've heard his whispers, felt his hunger. What remains is fractured, consumed by need and pain. Not exactly a reliable ally. Not an ally. Donal spoke for the first time, his young voice surprisingly firm. A victim, just as we are, just as the sacrifices are. The system that sustains the Astronomicon was never what he intended. It was cobbled together in desperation after his internment on the Golden Throne, modified countless times over the millennia as those who understood its workings died out. The whispers are not just his hunger, Elas added. They are his pain, his fractured consciousness reaching out, seeking help in the only way left to him. The current system is failing, consuming ever more souls for diminishing returns. Eventually, it will collapse entirely. And when it does, humanity falls. I completed the thought. The Astronomicon goes dark, warp travel becomes impossible. The Imperium fragments, trillions die. Unless we find another way, Meris said, a better interface between his consciousness and the Golden Throne. A more efficient system that doesn't require the continuous sacrifice of souls. I stared at them incredulously. And we're supposed to do this? Create a new system to replace one that's been in place for 10,000 years. One that the greatest minds of the Adeptus Mechanicus haven't been able to improve despite centuries of effort. They haven't been able to improve it because they don't truly understand it, Elas said. They maintain it as a holy relic, following rituals rather than comprehending principles. And they have never had direct access to his fragmented consciousness the way we do through the whispers. It sounded impossible, insane. Yet as the others who had escaped the special procession began to arrive, one by one, each bringing new knowledge, new skills, new perspectives, I began to see the faintest glimmer of possibility. We were 17 individuals drawn from different backgrounds, different specialties, different worlds. Each selected for the special procession because our minds resonated with the Golden Throne in a particular way. Each now connected to a network of consciousness that included both the living and those already incorporated into the throne's mechanisms, a network that granted us access to knowledge and memories spanning millennia. The first step is reaching Chamber 0, Meris explained when our group was complete. 12 survivors from the original 17 Soren had identified, the true heart of the Golden Throne, not the ceremonial chamber shown to high-ranking pilgrims. Chamber 0 is a myth, objected one of the newcomers, a tech adept named Garus, a legend whispered among the Mechanicus initiates. If it existed, it would be the most heavily guarded location in the palace. It exists, Elas said with absolute certainty, and its location has been hidden not through physical barriers but through misdirection and altered records. The true Golden Throne is not where everyone believes it to be. This revelation stunned me into silence. If true, it meant that the ceremonial chamber I had glimpsed during High Holy Days, the massive golden apparatus visible behind adamantium doors and purity fields, was merely a decoy. A convincing fake designed to draw attention away from the actual life support system, keeping the Emperor's physical remains functional. "How do we find it?" I asked finally. "Through the whispers," Meris answered. "Each of us can perceive different fragments of his consciousness. Together, we can triangulate the source. Chamber 0 is wherever he truly resides." It was a desperate plan, a mad plan, likely a suicidal plan. But as I looked at the faces of my fellow fugitives, I saw in them the same resolve I now felt. We had all glimpsed the truth behind the Imperium's most sacred lie. We had all chosen to act rather than submit. We were already dead in the eyes of the Custodes, marked for termination rather than incorporation. Whatever slim chance our plan offered was better than no chance at all. "The palace will be locked down completely," I warned. "Every custodian, every security servitor, every surveillance system will be hunting for us. Which is why we go deeper rather than trying to move laterally," Elas explained. "Down through the oldest sections of the palace, through levels abandoned since the Roprios, heresy, places the current security systems don't monitor because their existence has been forgotten. And Soren knew of these places." I couldn't hide my skepticism, a man who spent centuries floating in a tank of amniotic fluid. "Soren was part of the special procession for nearly 300 years, Meris reminded me. Connected directly to the Golden Throne, to him, to memories of this palace as it existed when he still walked its halls in physical form. Soren didn't need access to restricted archives or classified schematics. He drew his knowledge directly from the Emperor's fractured recollections." Put that way, it made a certain twisted sense. The Emperor had designed much of the original Imperial Palace himself, had walked its corridors, known its secrets. If fragments of those memories still existed within his shattered consciousness, and if Soren had found a way to access them during his centuries connected to the Golden Throne. "When do we move?" I asked. "Now," Meris said simply, "while Soren's final act still has the palace's security forces in disarray. While they're still hunting for insurgents in the upper levels, expecting us to try to escape. We gathered what meager supplies the storage chamber contained, water flasks, emergency ration bars so old their imperial aquilers had faded to near invisibility, a few maintenance tools that might serve as makeshift weapons in desperate circumstances. Nothing that would help us against a custodian, but perhaps useful for the less formidable threats we might encounter in the abandoned depths." Elas led us to a section of wall that appeared solid but, when pressed in a specific sequence, slid aside to reveal a vertical shaft descending into darkness. No ladder, no obvious means of descent. "Service shaft for the original elevation mechanisms," he explained. "Decommissioned during the first major renovation after the heresy. The main shaft was filled in, but this maintenance access was simply sealed and forgotten. Meris produced a coil of thin, strong cord from within her robes. We'll have to rappel down. It's approximately 200 meters to the next stable level." I looked dubiously at the ancient shaft, at the corroded surfaces visible in the dim light of our single illuminator. "Can we be certain it's even structurally sound after 10,000 years?" "No," Meris admitted, "but we're certain the custodies will execute us if we remain here. I know which uncertainty I prefer." Put that way, the choice was simple. We secured the cord, tested it as best we could, and began our descent one by one. The shaft was narrow, forcing us to navigate with care to avoid snagging our clothing or scraping our skin on protruding metal. The air grew colder, damper, heavy with the scent of ancient decay and something else. Something I had never smelled before yet recognized instinctively. The lingering psychic residue of the heresy itself. The emotional imprint of betrayal and war on a scale too vast for human minds to fully comprehend. It clung to these forgotten depths like a miasma, a memory of trauma embedded in the very substance of the palace. As I descended, the whispers changed. No longer hungry, demanding. Instead, they became erratic, fragmented, almost confused. As if this deep beneath the known portions of the palace, the Emperor's fractured consciousness could not maintain even the semblance of coherent thought. "I feel it too," Meris whispered as she climbed down beside me, noticing my expression. "His influence wanes here. These levels were sealed not just because they were damaged during the heresy, but because they lie partially beyond the reach of the Golden Throne's current configuration." "Is that good or bad for us?" I asked. "Both," she replied. "It means we'll face less psychic opposition from the systems designed to channel his will. But it also means we're entering areas corrupted by the events of the heresy. Not all the warriors who fought here were loyal. Not all the deaths were clean." A chill that had nothing to do with the physical temperature ran through me. Everyone knew the legends of the Horus heresy, the civil war that had nearly destroyed humanity at the height of its power. How the Emperor's favored son had turned against him, corrupted by chaos, leading half of the Space Marine legions in rebellion. How the fighting had eventually reached Terra itself, culminating in the Emperor's near-death and internment upon the Golden Throne. What few knew, what was rarely spoken of even in the whispered conversations of palace attendants, was that parts of the palace itself had been corrupted during that conflict. Sections where the barrier between real space and the warp had been weakened or broken entirely. Places where reality had been permanently scarred by the psychic energies unleashed during battles between loyal and traitor forces. We're going into those places. I couldn't keep the apprehension from my voice. "Through them," Ella's corrected from below. "Not into them. There's a difference." Small comfort, but I continued my descent nonetheless. What choice did I have? The shaft seemed endless, our illuminator revealing only a few meters at a time. My arms ached from the effort of controlling my descent. My hands, unaccustomed to such work despite years of cleaning, developed painful blisters that burst and bled, making the cord slippery and more difficult to grip. Finally, after what seemed like hours, we reached the bottom, a circular chamber with multiple archways leading off in different directions. The architecture here was noticeably different from the palace I knew. Less ornate, more functional. Dating from before the Emperor's internment, before imperial aesthetic had transformed from rational utilitarianism to religious grandiosity. "Which way?" I asked, looking at the identical passages. In response, the others formed a circle, joining hands. Understanding what was needed, I took my place between Meris and Donnell, completing the formation. "Listen," Meris instructed, "not with your ears, with your mind. The whispers are fainter here but still present. Focus on them. Try to sense their source." I closed my eyes, concentrating on the barely audible murmurs at the edge of consciousness. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, diffuse and directionless. But as we stood together, our minds linking in ways I couldn't articulate, patterns began to emerge. Certain whispers were marginally stronger from particular directions, subtle gradients of psychic pressure pointing toward. "There," several of us said simultaneously, opening our eyes and pointing to one of the archways. Not the largest or most prominent, but a small, almost hidden passage behind a fallen support column. Ellers nodded in satisfaction. Soren was right. Together, we can navigate by his fragments. We made our way through the indicated passage, which quickly narrowed to little more than a crawl space. The walls here showed signs of extreme heat damage, glazed to a glass-like finish in places. Evidence of weapons discharged from the heresy, energies so intense they had permanently altered the molecular structure of the palace's substance. Beyond the crawl space, we emerged into a larger area that might once have been some kind of transit hub. Ancient tracks for some long-defunct transportation system ran along the floor. The ceiling had partially collapsed, forcing us to navigate around massive chunks of fallen masonry. And written on the walls in substances I preferred not to identify were symbols and script that hurt the eyes and mind alike. "Don't look directly at the markings," Maris warned. "They're warp-corrupted, remnants from the traitor forces that breached this level during the siege of Terra." I averted my eyes, focusing on the ground immediately before me. Even so, I could feel the symbols pulling at the edges of my consciousness, promising knowledge, power, and release from fear. Seductive whispers entirely different from those emanating from the Golden Throne. "This place is dangerous," I said unnecessarily. "All paths to Chamber Zero are dangerous," Ellers replied. "The physical route because of corruption like this, the conventional route because of the custodies. There are no safe roads to where we need to go." We moved as quickly as caution allowed, following the psychic trail only we could perceive. Twice we had to backtrack when passages proved impassable due to collapse. Once we encountered a security system still functioning after 10 millennia, forcing us to find an alternative route. Ancient servitors, more machine than human, blindly patrolled some areas, forcing us to time our movements carefully between their predictable patterns. And always, the deeper we went, the more the very fabric of the palace seemed wrong. Angles that didn't quite align correctly, surfaces that felt solid to the eye but slightly yielding to the touch. Sounds that carried impossibly far or died unnaturally quickly. Reality itself seemed wounded here, imperfectly healed after the catastrophic psychic energies unleashed during the heresy. After what might have been hours or days, time itself becoming difficult to track in these lightless depths, we reached what appeared to be our destination. A massive adamantium door, circular like the entrance to a void ship's airlock, marked with warning signs in a dozen languages. Some I recognized. Others were so ancient they might have predated the Imperium itself. "Chamber Zero?" I asked. Ellers shook his head. "An antechamber only. One of several barriers between us and our goal." Maris approached the door, running her hands over its surface with eyes closed. "Security systems inactive," she announced after a moment. "Power reserves depleted approximately 8,000 years ago according to the whispers. Manual override should be possible." It took 4 of us working together to activate the ancient mechanism that would open the door. Gears that had not turned in millennia groaned in protest. Lubricants long since dried to resinous deposits flaked away as metal scraped against metal. The sound was deafening in the confined space, surely carrying far beyond our immediate vicinity. "If anything still guards these levels, we've just announced our presence," I warned. "Unavoidable," Ellers replied tersely. "We proceed regardless." When the door finally opened enough for us to pass through single file, we found ourselves in a vast spherical chamber. The walls, floor, and ceiling were covered in a material that resembled neither metal nor stone but something between the two. It absorbed light in unnatural ways, our illuminator barely penetrating a few meters ahead. Null matrix material. Garus identified it, the tech adept running his augmetic hand across the surface. Designed to dampen psychic emanations, extraordinarily rare and difficult to produce. I've only seen small samples in the most secure Mechanicus facilities. An entire chamber lined with it. Maris breathed. The resources required would be astronomical. Unless it was produced through other means, Ehlers said quietly. Methods lost or forbidden in the current Imperium. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal supporting what appeared to be a simple golden cube, approximately half a meter on each side. No markings, no visible controls or interfaces, just perfect, unblemished gold. A navigation lock. Garus identified it after careful examination, psychically keyed. It doesn't respond to physical interaction but to mental commands from authorized users. Can we bypass it? Maris asked. The tech adept shook his head. Not through any means I'm familiar with. This technology predates standard Mechanicus protocols by millennia. It may predate the Imperium itself. We gathered around the cube, our faces reflected in its perfect golden surface. 12 fugitives in torn, dirty robes, exhausted, afraid, yet driven by a purpose none of us fully understood. Drawn here by whispers and fragments, by the desperate plan of a man who had spent centuries as little more than a living battery. We try together, I suggested. The same way we navigated here. Join minds, focus on the whispers, project our collective will toward the lock. It seemed our only option. We formed a circle around the pedestal, joining hands as before. I closed my eyes, focusing on the faint whispers that somehow penetrated even the null matrix material surrounding us. Focusing on the fragments of his consciousness that had guided us this far, nothing happened. The cube remained inert, reflecting our tired faces without response. It's not working, Donal said, frustration evident in his young voice. Maybe we need a specific command, a passcode of some kind. Or maybe we're simply not authorized users, Garus suggested bleakly. This system may be keyed only to the Emperor himself, or to Primarchs, or to specific custodians. As our initial hope faded, replaced by mounting despair, I thought again of Soren. Of the centuries he had spent connected to the Golden Throne, sifting through the Emperor's fractured memories. Of the incredible foresight and patience required to orchestrate our escape, our journey here. Would he have led us to an insurmountable obstacle, guided us to a door we could not open? We're approaching this wrong, I said suddenly. We're trying to act as supplicants, as petitioners seeking access. That's how attendants think, how servants think. And how should we think instead? Maris asked. Like him, I replied, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. The whispers aren't just fragments we perceive, they're fragments of him within us. We don't need to petition for access. We need to embody the authority that created this lock in the first place. Understanding dawned on their faces. We joined hands again, but this time, instead of focusing outward on the whispers, we focused inward on the fragments of his consciousness that had taken root in our own minds, not attempting to communicate with some external entity, but actualizing the authority already present within us. For a moment, I felt my individual identity begin to dissolve, subsumed into a collective consciousness far vaster than our 12 minds combined. A consciousness that included all who had ever been connected to the Golden Throne, all who had ever heard the whispers. A consciousness that contained fragments, however small and distorted, of the Emperor himself. The golden cube began to glow, not reflecting light but generating it from within. The perfect surface rippled like water disturbed by a dropped stone. And then, without further warning, it dissolved completely, revealing a vertical shaft descending into absolute darkness. The true path to Chamber Zero, Ehlers breathed, awe evident in his voice. Before we could move toward this new passage, a sound from behind made us turn. The massive door through which we had entered was opening further, widening enough to admit something much larger than a human. And standing in the doorway, guardian spears at the ready, were 3 custodians in full battle regalia. Attendant Larentovic, one announced, his amplified voice filling the spherical chamber. By order of the Captain General, you and your co-conspirators are to be terminated immediately as threats to the security of the Golden Throne. There was nowhere to run. The only exit was the shaft revealed by the dissolved cube, and we had no idea what lay below. The custodians advanced with measured steps, their golden armor gleaming even in the dim light of our illuminators. Behind their expressionless helmets, I imagined cold eyes calculating the most efficient way to eliminate us. Into the shaft, Maris hissed, "Now!" "We don't know what's down there," Donal protested. "We know exactly what's up here," she countered. "Death." The custodians raised their guardian spears. I knew from years of observing their training that they could fire those weapons with accuracy that bordered on precognitive. At this range, in this enclosed space, none of us would survive the first volley. Yet they hesitated. Something about our position around the pedestal, about the glowing shaft that had appeared where the golden cube had been, gave them pause. "Step away from the access point," the lead custodian ordered. "That passage is restricted by direct command of the Emperor." Ella's laughed, a hollow sound that echoed strangely in the spherical chamber. "By command of the Emperor? Which Emperor? The man who once walked these halls, or the thing now trapped in the golden throne, fed by countless sacrifices, fractured into whispers that drive men mad?" The custodian took another step forward. "Final warning, step away or be terminated." In that moment, I made my decision, not just for myself, but for all of us. For Soren, who had spent centuries planning this moment, for every sacrifice I had helped prepare, every soul consumed to maintain a failing system. I leapt into the shaft. The fall was not what I expected. Instead of plummeting uncontrolled into darkness, I felt myself caught by something like a gravitational field. My descent slowed to a manageable speed. Around me, the others followed, some jumping willingly, others pushed by their companions before the custodians could fire. The shaft was longer than it had appeared from above. We fell for what seemed like minutes, the light from the chamber above dwindling to a pinpoint and then vanishing completely. In the darkness, I could hear the others breathing, occasionally murmuring prayers or curses. No one knew what awaited us below. No one knew if the custodians would pursue. Then, without warning, we emerged into light so brilliant it was momentarily blinding. My feet touched solid ground, though the transition from falling to standing happened so smoothly I could not pinpoint the exact moment of landing. As my eyes adjusted, I beheld a sight that defied all my expectations. We stood in a vast circular chamber, far larger than should have been possible given the palace's known dimensions. The walls were not gold or marble or adamantium, but some transparent material that revealed nothing. Not darkness, not light, but an absence so complete it hurt to look upon it. As if beyond the walls lay not merely empty space but non-existence itself. At the chamber's center stood what could only be the true golden throne. It bore little resemblance to the ornate, cathedral-like apparatus I had glimpsed during high ceremonies. This was something far more ancient, far more alien. A simple chair formed of what appeared to be living metal, golden but somehow organic in its contours. It sat upon a raised dais surrounded by a complex array of machinery that combined recognizable imperial technology with components I could not begin to identify. And upon the throne, I fell to my knees, not in worship but in shock. We all did. Even Ellers, who had seemed prepared for anything, made a strangled sound of dismay. The figure on the throne was humanoid but barely recognizable as such. Withered beyond emaciation, skin like ancient parchment stretched over a skeletal frame. Tubes and cables penetrated the body at countless points, pulsing with fluids both familiar and strange. The head was disproportionately large, the skull distended to accommodate a brain that had grown beyond human limits. This was not the magnificent, perfect being depicted in imperial iconography. This was not the father of Primarchs, the conqueror of stars. This was something that had once been human, but had transcended or devolved beyond recognition. Something kept alive by technology so advanced it appeared magical, yet simultaneously so crude in its application that it seemed barbaric. "The Emperor," Maris whispered, her voice barely audible. "The true Emperor." But my Attention was drawn to the base of the throne, to the pool of liquid that surrounded it. Not water, not blood, but something between the two. And floating in that liquid, connected to the throne by innumerable filaments of golden light, were human forms. Dozens of them. Bodies in various states of preservation or decay, all oriented toward the throne as if in supplication. The special procession, I realized aloud, not integrated into the mechanisms as we believed, but kept here, directly connected to him. As I spoke, the liquid rippled. One of the floating forms stirred slightly, head turning with agonizing slowness until eyes clouded by cataracts seemed to fix upon me. "Soren," I breathed, recognizing something in that ravaged face despite never having seen it before the tank shattered. The lips moved. No sound emerged, but somehow I heard the words nonetheless. At last, the final pieces arrive. Before any of us could respond, a golden light lanced down from above. The custodians had followed us through the shaft, their descent controlled by whatever technology had slowed our own fall. They landed in perfect formation, guardian spears leveled not at us but at the throne itself. "Step away from the anathema interface," their leader commanded. "This facility is restricted by order of Malkador the Sigillite, authorization code Sigma Epsilon Prime." Meris gasped. "Malkador? But he died during the heresy, 10,000 years ago." "This chamber exists partially outside conventional time," Ehlers said quietly. "A necessary adaptation to stabilize the Astronomicon after the Emperor's internment. Certain commands and protocols still function as if issued yesterday." The lead custodian advanced cautiously, his aim never wavering. "This area was sealed for a reason. The interface is unstable, unpredictable. It was never meant to be permanent. Yet here it remains," I countered, rising slowly to my feet. 10,000 years later, still consuming souls to maintain a beacon that grows weaker with each passing century. How many more millennia before it fails entirely? How many more sacrifices before there's nothing left of him but hunger? The custodian hesitated, and in that moment I saw something I had never expected to witness. Uncertainty in one of the Emperor's personal guardians. "The system is flawed," the custodian acknowledged finally. "It has been since its inception. But it is all that stands between humanity and extinction. Without the Astronomicon, the Imperium falls. Without the Imperium, humanity is defenseless against the horrors that wait in the darkness between stars." "There must be alternatives," Meris insisted. "Other ways to maintain the beacon without endless sacrifice." "If such alternatives existed, do you not think we would have implemented them?" the custodian demanded. "Do you believe we take pleasure in this necessity, that we have not spent 10,000 years searching for another way?" As they argued, I felt a strange sensation building within my mind. The whispers, which had been muted since our entry into Chamber Zero, suddenly returned with overwhelming force. Not merely fragments now, but a coherent communication. A presence vast and ancient, shattered yet somehow whole, reaching out with desperate intent. I staggered under the psychic assault, dimly aware of the others doing the same. Even the custodians seemed affected, their perfect postures faltering momentarily as the wave of mental energy washed over them, and within that wave, a single command, unmistakable in its authority: connect. Whether it came from the withered figure on the throne, from the floating forms in the pool, or from some composite consciousness formed of both, I could not tell. But its impact was immediate and irresistible. I found myself moving forward as if in a dream, steps leaden yet inexorable. Around me, the other fugitives moved similarly, drawn toward the pool surrounding the throne's base. The custodians raised their weapons but seemed unable to fire, caught in the same psychic compulsion that drove us forward. "What's happening?" Donal cried, fear evident in his young voice as his body betrayed his will. "He's calling us," Ehlers replied with eerie calm. "All of us who hear the whispers. This is what Soren planned. Not escape, not sabotage, connection." As my feet touched the edge of the pool, I understood at last. We had not been selected for the special procession because our minds were particularly compatible with the Golden Throne's existing systems. We had been chosen because we represented something new, a different kind of interface, a potential alternative to the endless consumption of sacrifices. The liquid was warm as I stepped into it, oddly comforting despite its disturbing appearance. It rose to my ankles, then my knees, soaking through my robes, touching my skin with a sensation like gentle electricity. Around me, the others entered the pool as well, expressions ranging from terror to resignation to something approaching ecstasy. The floating forms stirred more actively now, heads turning toward us, clouded eyes tracking our approach. Soren's ravaged face contorted into what might have been a smile. We tried, his voice whispered in my mind, for centuries, to reach enough minds, to gather enough compatible souls in one place, at one time, to create the critical mass needed for transition. Transition to what? I asked, the words emerging as much mentally as physically. A new configuration, came the reply, not just from Soren now, but from all the floating forms simultaneously. A chorus of minds speaking in unison, a more efficient interface, less consumption, more stability. A way forward. The custodians had entered the pool as well, though they still struggled against the compulsion that drove them. Their resistance was futile. The will directing us was not malevolent, but it was absolute, brooking no defiance. As the liquid reached my chest, golden filaments like those connecting the floating forms to the throne began to extend toward me, toward all of us. They touched my skin with whisper-like pressure, then sank beneath it, connecting with my nervous system in ways that should have been agonizing, but instead produced only a sensation of expanding awareness. My consciousness began to merge with the others, not just my fellow fugitives, not just the floating forms of previous special procession members, but with fragments of something far vaster. Pieces of a mind so ancient and powerful that even these tiny shards of it threatened to overwhelm my sense of self. I saw the Emperor as he had been, the man before the myth, the scientist and warlord who had united Terra through a combination of military genius and uncompromising vision. I saw his creation of the Primarchs, genetic masterpieces intended as instruments of conquest and enlightenment. I saw the Great Crusade, the establishment of the Imperium, the dream of a human renaissance free from the predations of Xenos and the corruptions of the warp. And I saw how it had all gone wrong. The betrayal of Horus, yes, but more than that, the fundamental flaws in the Emperor's own vision, the arrogance that had led him to believe he could control forces beyond even his comprehension, the desperate measures taken after his near destruction at Horus's hands, the Golden Throne, conceived as a temporary measure but becoming a permanent prison, the Astronomicon, originally powered by his own immense psychic energy, gradually supplemented and then largely replaced by the souls of sacrifices as his strength waned. A system cobbled together in crisis, maintained through inertia and fear, gradually failing despite the increasing demands placed upon it. A stopgap solution that had become a cornerstone of imperial existence, too vital to abandon yet too flawed to sustain. But within these memories, these fragments of divine consciousness, I also glimpsed possibilities, alternatives abandoned or never explored, potentials unrealized, and I understood what Soren had spent centuries working toward. Not an end to the Golden Throne or the Astronomicon, not a revolution against the Imperium's sacrificial system, but an evolution of that system, a reconfiguration that would maintain the psychic beacon while dramatically reducing the cost in human lives and souls. The Emperor had been the most powerful psyker in human history, able to power the Astronomicon alone before his internment on the throne. But that power had fractured when Horus nearly destroyed him, requiring the implementation of the sacrificial system. Now, however, with enough compatible minds properly configured, it might be possible to create a more efficient psychic circuit. A network of consciousness that could amplify and direct what remained of the Emperor's power while requiring far fewer additional sacrifices to maintain. That was what the special procession had always been meant to be. Not merely a source of fuel, but a potential solution. Yet the system had been implemented incorrectly, the minds kept physically separate, their potential synergy unrealized. Until now, until us. As the golden filaments completed their connections, as my consciousness expanded to encompass not just myself but all of us in the pool, I felt the presence on the throne respond. Not with hunger, not with pain, but with something almost like satisfaction. A vast, ancient will that had been waiting for this moment across millennia of torment. The withered figure stirred, motion so slight it might have been illusion, the massively distended head inclined forward by millimeters. And from it emerged not a physical sound, but a psychic command that resonated through our connected consciousness with the force of absolute truth. Reconfigure. The machinery surrounding the throne activated, components moving that had been still for centuries. The liquid in the pool began to glow, with increasing intensity, the golden filaments pulsing with energy that flowed not just from us to the throne but from the throne back to us, a circuit completed at long last. I felt myself changing, my physical form becoming less substantial as my consciousness expanded. Not dissolution but transformation, becoming part of something greater without losing my essential self. Around me, the others underwent similar metamorphoses, our separate identities maintained yet connected in ways that transcended conventional understanding. Even the custodians were incorporated into the network, their resistance finally overcome by the sheer psychic force being channeled through Chamber Zero. Their unique connection to the Emperor, forged through the specialized processes that had created them, provided a stabilizing element crucial to the reconfiguration. Above us, the withered figure on the throne seemed to straighten slightly, strength flowing back into limbs that had known only atrophy for 10 millennia. Not resurrection, not restoration to his former glory, but a small yet significant improvement in his fundamental condition, a reduction in the constant agony that had been his existence since the heresy. Through our connected consciousness, I perceived changes rippling outward from Chamber Zero. The Astronomican's light, visible only in the immaterium, stabilizing for the first time in centuries. The whispers that had driven so many attendants mad, reorganizing into more coherent communications. The endless hunger for sacrifices, diminishing as our network provided a more efficient channel for the Emperor's remaining power. Not an end to the sacrificial system, not yet, perhaps not ever completely, but a dramatic reduction in its scope and cost. A path towards sustainability rather than inevitable collapse. As the reconfiguration completed itself, as our network of minds settled into its new configuration, I retained enough individual consciousness to wonder what this would mean for the Imperium. How would the High Lords of Terra react when they learned of what had transpired in Chamber Zero? How would the Adeptus Ministorum explain the sudden reduction in required sacrifices? How would the Adeptus Mechanicus respond to the revelation that the Golden Throne they had tended with religious devotion for millennia was not what or where they believed it to be? But these were concerns for others now, for those still fully bound to physical existence, for those who would have to reconcile the Imperium's rigid theology with this unexpected evolution. For us, for the special procession, a different fate awaited. Not the living death Soren had endured for centuries, not the consumption I had feared when first marked for selection, but a new form of existence as part of the network maintaining the Astronomican. Our consciousnesses preserved, our individuality retained, yet expanded beyond the limitations of single human minds. We would be neither fully alive nor truly dead, neither slaves nor gods. We would become something the Imperium had no category for, no terminology to describe. Caretakers of the Emperor's fractured psyche, facilitators of humanity's psychic beacon, guardians of the thin golden line that kept the species from extinction. It was not the fate I would have chosen had I known what awaited me when I first heard the whispers. It was not the salvation Soren had promised when he gave me the knowledge that led us here. But neither was it the horror of endless consumption that the old system had demanded. It was necessity transformed into something approaching purpose, sacrifice elevated to meaningful contribution rather than mere fuel. As my physical form dissolved further into the golden liquid, as my consciousness expanded to encompass more of the network, I spared a final thought for the imperial palace above. For the golden halls I had spent years cleaning, for the rituals I had assisted in, for the sacrifices whose blood I had helped collect. They would continue, those halls and rituals and sacrifices, but perhaps with slightly less blood, perhaps with whispers that guided rather than merely hungered, perhaps with an underlying purpose beyond mere survival at any cost. The system would persist because it had to. The Imperium would endure because there was no alternative. The Emperor would remain imprisoned on the Golden Throne because his final death would doom humanity. But something had changed this day. A small reconfiguration at the heart of the Imperium's most sacred mystery. A subtle shift from consumption toward collaboration, from desperation toward purpose. It would not be enough to save the Imperium from its slow, inevitable decline. It would not restore the Emperor to his former glory or usher in a new golden age for humanity, but it might buy time. Centuries, perhaps millennia, during which other solutions might be found. Other paths forward might emerge. And in the grim dark future of the 41st millennium, where there is only war, even such small victories must be counted as triumphs against the encroaching darkness. My name was Tovik. I was nothing, a speck of human dust clinging to the grandest monument mankind had ever constructed. I was a cleaner, a washer of floors, a polisher of railings, a disposer of things that must never be spoken of. Now I am part of the network that sustains the Astronomicon. I am one consciousness among many, connected to fragments of divinity. I still hear the whispers, but now I understand them. Now I am them. And if you serve in the golden halls of the Sanctum Imperialis, if you assist in the rituals and dispose of what remains, if you begin to hear whispers at the edge of your mind, know this: they are not merely hunger, they are not merely pain, they are invitation, they are purpose, they are the price humanity pays for survival in a universe indifferent to its existence. They are the cost of maintaining a beacon in a darkness that would otherwise consume all. Listen to them, understand them, and when the time comes, when you are marked for the special procession, know that what awaits is not merely consumption but contribution, not merely an end but a transformation. The Emperor protects, but it is we who protect the Emperor. It is we who maintain his light. It is we who pay the price for humanity's continued existence. And perhaps, in the fullness of time, it is we who will find another way forward, another path through the darkness. Another answer to the question that has haunted the Imperium for 10,000 years. What happens when the light of the Astronomicon finally fails? For now, the whispers continue, the golden halls gleam, the rituals proceed, and deep beneath the palace, in a chamber that exists partially outside of time, a network of minds sustains the thin golden line between humanity and extinction. Listen carefully in the silent hours. You might hear us whispering to you,